Welcome to ECO-TERRA Chronicles, stories of ecological injustice on the land. I'm Hermina Glass-Hill, she, her, hers. I am the coastal and environmental justice organizer in coastal Georgia at Georgia Interfaith Power and Light on Wale and Yamasee land. Our guest today is Neesha Powell. Neesha is a coastal Georgia born and raised movement journalist, essayist, grant writer, cat parent, spouse, and auntie living in Atlanta occupied Creek territory. Their writing has been published in publications such as Harper's Bazaar, the Oxford American, Prism, Scalawag, and Vice. Their website is neeshawrites.com. That's NEESHAWRITES.com, NeeshaWrites.com. And Neesha, I understand that you have a special song that you would like to share with us, ground us this morning as we begin.
Yes, I do. So I would love for us to hear the McIntosh County Ring Shouters, Kumbaya. I feel like everyone knows that song, but I only recently learned that its origins are in McIntosh County, Georgia, where my family is from. So it's even more important to me now.
There's never been a time that I can recall that I did not know the song.
Right.
I've known the song since birth, essentially. What does that song mean to you? Kumbaya, what does that mean?
Yeah. Wow. It was mind-blowing to learn that, its origins are in McIntosh County. I saw the Ring Shouters for the first time last year. I may have seen them when I was like really young, but I can't exactly remember if it was them or not. And so I saw them last year in in Liberty County, actually. And it really touched me. The performance really touched me. And then, to learn how this like international universal song was from tiny McIntosh County, Georgia, where I grew up going to church and all of my relatives living there. And I don't know, it's really unfortunate that I didn't know about that sooner. So.
Right. And that song has its roots in Gullah Geechee culture.
Right.
Kumbaya is essentially a person requesting of God to come by here.
Right.
And you are of Gullah Geechee heritage, is that?
Yes, and I say that really confidently now, I feel like, and that's only happened over the past few months. I didn't grow up thinking of myself as Gullah Geechee, anything like that. I grew up with little understanding of it and being taught very little about it in school. I grew up in Glenn County, so that's right by McIntosh County, both of them in coastal Georgia. Even though the culture is right there, and we were never taught that in school. So it's only recently that I began to like really dig into what it means to be Gullah Geechee, and asking my mother mostly about our history, but it's always been kind of right there, right in front of me. But when I ask my mom, I'm like, are we Gullah Geechee? She'll say no. She's just like, no, like, I went to school with them, but, they were just over, they were over there. And like, I only learned about the significance of it when I got older. And, but yeah, I mean, it's something that I feel like she looks at as foreign. And I think when she was growing up, maybe it wasn't and I've kind of read this other places as well. It wasn't the cool thing to be. It means you had an accent. It meant this or that. So I feel like a lot of people who do have that ancestry, we don't grow up calling ourselves that, especially us who are like millennials and things like that. So.
Right. I'm speaking with elders in my community here in Liberty County. I've spoken with one person in particular. She's 94 years old, and she informed us that, of course, when they were at home, they acknowledged all of these cultural ways of being in the world, including language. But when they went to school, they were required to not speak that way. And so growing up, it became a part of kind of shaming, language shaming that they endure. Can you speak a little bit about, what your mom heard?
About what my mom
About her experiences and about the language.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like I always knew that accent and would always kind of, maybe hear her and my grandma, like, they could speak in that accent, right? I recently did a story that was all about how, fishing is indigenous to the Gullah Geechee culture. And so I interviewed my mom for that story and was learning just, our family was very much involved in, that industry. That was a way that they made their livelihood. She told me that my grandmother and my uncle would go to the docks and they would head shrimps. And she was like, well, they wouldn't let me go. I think they didn't want me to like go talk to the boys. But everyone around her was going and making money that way, going to the docks, probably the Meridian dock and maybe other ones too, and heading shrimps, cutting the head off shrimps. We've had, people in our family who've been fishers, and my mom told me that's how they ate. Like people who were fishers and worked on the sea would come and bring them free seafood, and that's how they would eat. Like she was like shucking oysters at a young age. So learning about that piece, I was like, okay, wow, for me, that felt distinctly Geechee, right? And yeah, I mean, my mother, she was a home health nurse on Sapelo Island for a long time. She took care of elders on Sapelo Island who made baskets and things like that. And she'll be like, I wish I had learned, I wish I had learned from them. And she'll talk about, driving around in the state car on Sapelo Island and like alligators, having to wait for alligators to cross and things like that. Strangely enough, I've never been to Sapelo Island, even though I grew up going to a Baptist church in Meridian, which is, you have to go to the Meridian dock to get to Sapelo. But I've never been because I feel like, when we go on field trips, we would go to Fort Frederica on St. Simons. We would go to Fort, I think it's King George and Darien, but they didn't take us to Sapelo Island and tell us the importance of that or all of the many other Black historical sites in coastal Georgia. Like that wasn't really important. We would go see the white things, I feel like.
Touched on this a little bit. I'm interested in your impressions and memories of the landscape that resonates with you.
Mm-hmm. So the landscape that resonated with me and kind of like what I grew up around. Yeah. So coastal Georgia, I mean, there's a lot of water, obviously, because it's on the coast. So a lot of, beaches, we're by the ocean, lots of lakes, lots of rivers, lots of marsh. I remember living right by the marsh, lots of rain, lots of Yeah, lots of rain. And then, you know, during hurricane season, we're in hurricane season right now, there would always be threats of hurricanes. And then sometimes there would be evacuations and things like that. And I just remember like different businesses and people's houses being boarded up when a big hurricane was coming. I remember being around 5 and a big hurricane coming. And I remember it blew a tree in our front yard over, and like it tore our deck apart. Like that's how strong it was. And I just remember like looking out my window during it, like being 5 years old and being like, whoa. So just lots of, it's very, very lush. I feel like we have lots of trees naturally, and lots of water. And yeah, that's kind of the environment. And it's very, very important to Black folks, because Black folks have been there since slavery times, working that land. And like going back to the fishing, living off the land, like fishing, farming, and yeah, that's kind of the environment I grew up in.
Well, you mentioned fishing and farming, so were those your foodways as well?
Definitely not really farming, I don't think, but definitely seafood. You know, I remember going to, you know, kind of like the side of the road seafood shop, and my mom going to get those crab, and, you know, us just like chowing down, having a low country boil, huge part of life. So I think definitely the seafood. And I remember just on Friday evenings, like my mom and grandma, like frying fish and things like that. I mean, that is what they knew. Just like I said, they lived off, you know, people just giving out seafood for free. So very much a part of life.
Cultural foodways that still exist to this day. People eat fish, the fish store, or the local fish market is always packed on Friday.
Oh, yes.
And it still is. Would you consider these lands, grounds, from this new cultural entry that you are entering in and claiming as part of yourself? Would you consider this sacred ground? If so, why?
Very much so. It very much so. And I feel like I took it for granted growing up, but going in, and I didn't go back for many, many years. I feel like it had been almost 10 years between maybe like 2010 and 2020, maybe not that long, but there was a long gap of time where I did not go back to Brunswick or back to coastal Georgia. Because I don't know. Like I said, you didn't grow up with, if you were Black growing up in coastal Georgia, you didn't really feel proud of it, I feel like, or maybe you did, right? But you weren't taught to be proud of it. And, you know, you would just all hear like Brunstank and just like all these different things about Brunswick, and you felt like being from Brunswick was a bad thing and you wanted to get away and go off to college or whatever. And so that's what I did. But then, like I said, now as I got older, just very much appreciating all the history there, everything I grew up around, learning. So I learned the story of Igbo landing in college, actually. So the story about the Nigerians who, you know, they committed mutiny on their ship. They like killed their slave masters or drowned them, or, you know, whatever. They were trying to be free. They were a group of Igbo, enslaved Igbo people. They didn't want to be enslaved. So after all of that, they ended up drowning themselves instead of being enslaved. And that on St. Simon's. And, you know, I grew up right by St. Simon's, minutes away from St. Simon's, not knowing that important piece of history, this important piece of Black rebellion, right? I mean, there's this narrative that enslaved Africans did not fight back, but they actually did. And they did at a landmark that is very, very close to where I grew up. So this story of Igbo landing has become more popular over the years. Even Beyonce in one of her videos kind of alludes to it in a scene. But unfortunately, the actual site where Igbo landing is in a private neighborhood. So we don't even have, Black folks don't even have access to that history. And then Dunbar Creek, where it happened, is a part of a wastewater treatment plant. That is a sacred place for us, for all African Americans, all Africans, period. And we have, not only do we not have access to it, but it's, you know, it's a wastewater treatment plant, right? Like I don't think that should have been Igbo landing's fate.
How does that make you feel that the land has been desecrated in such a way?
Just sad, very, very frustrating. It's just so frustrating. Because I actually went, you know, trying to get close to it. You know, I went looking for it, and it's just saddens me, angers me. But it feels so, you know, it feels kind of hopeless, because it's like, what do we do now? You know, I don't know. I don't want to say that it feels hopeless, but I feel like what we can do is keep writing about it, keep making sure people know these stories. And then that's how things change. I feel like if we keep telling this story, how important this place is to us, maybe, you know, someday we will be able to, you know, have access to it.
But, you know, you are a movement journalist. Explain what that is, and you know, how you use the power of your pen as essentially an activist speaking on behalf of Gullah Geechee.
Yeah, so I started identifying as a movement journalist. In the past few years, I became involved with an organization called Press On, which is a group of movement journalists. So it can mean different things to different people, but for me, it means that I am writing about the grassroots justice movements that I am a part of, and I am accountable to those folks. And I am, you know, I am telling stories of my community, people in my community, and trying to do it in a very intentional, ethical way that is not, you know, an extraction of their stories, right? So yeah, that's kind of what being a movement journalist means to me. And yeah, it's been exciting. It's been exciting to kind of embrace that term. And I think traditionally, you know, journalists, you know, you think about journalists have to be unbiased, you know, and they shouldn't be, I don't know, there's all these things about what a journalist should or should not be. And I felt like in my training at the University of Georgia in journalism was very traditional. There was really no talk of how we can use journalism to create social change, right? But so it's been exciting to learn that, you know, you don't have to be like this totally unbiased journalist. And it's not just about reporting the facts, even though that's a part of it. It's about using folks' narratives to shift culture and to create political, social, cultural change. And it's about, yeah, doing that, but doing it in an ethical way, which the mainstream media does not necessarily do.
You've been writing a lot lately about gentrification here on the coast, as well. Do you talk about that?
Yeah. So I came across the term tropical gentrification. It was a Christian Science Monitor article. Can't remember the author's name, but this author was writing about on St. Simon's, how it used to be after slavery. Actually, always it was predominantly Black, because the white slave masters, they would only live on the plantations for so long because it was so hot on St. Simon's, right? And they weren't used to those conditions. So just talking about, after slavery, how, Black folks on St. Simon's, it was like 90% Black owned, and or something like that. And how, kind of during the mid 20th century is when the tropical gentrification started to happen. So this term I read, this tropical gentrification, and that looked like white folks and developers coming on St. Simon's and displacing Black people who had been there for literally centuries. And doing like speculative development and kind of like harassing people out of their homes, offering them obscene amounts of money to sell their land and things like that. And so St. Simon's has went from being, over the years, from being predominantly Black to being predominantly white and wealthy. And when you think about St. Simon's, people, your average person who knows about St. Simon's, they don't think about Black folks or Blackness. They think about rich, wealthy, ritzy people, beaches, whatever. And so, yeah, it's just so unfair to think about. But Black folks on St. Simon's are pushing back, and they did preserve a Black schoolhouse called the Harrington School. I haven't been able to go inside yet. I have, because I went there during the pandemic. I didn't know about this when I was growing up. I didn't know anything about this story. But yeah, they preserved this school, this historically Black school, that operated, up until the 60s. And they also, did a campaign they have a land trust to try to, the Black folks who are still in St. Simon's, to try to keep them in their homes. Yeah, but sometimes it just feels like too little, too late. Now the number of Black folks on St. Simon's is so small, and how do you? I don't know. Like, how do you reverse that? Like, and now it's so expensive to actually live on St. Simon's, right? And so I don't know how many Black folks in coastal Georgia can afford that. So,
right. I was speaking with Josiah Watts, Jazz, who's from Sapelo. Do you know Jazz?
I know them through Facebook.
Yeah. I used to meet. Jazz expressed to me that it's less than 10% African American in St. Simon's Island, and when he grew up there as a child, it was mostly African American homeowners there. So you have a really great point with people being either priced out of being able to afford their homes, or taxed out of able to afford their homes because of the development and the high cost of taxes. So you speak of St. Simon as like very neighboring to Brunswick, but Brunswick is the main, right?
Mm-hmm. Brunswick is the mainland, and it's connected by a causeway.
Right, and every time I go across that causeway, I feel like it's some kind of strange umbilical cord connecting me to something there. How do you feel going from the mainland to the island? What are your feelings about that?
Wow. I don't know. It's very much a tale of two cities once you cross that causeway. So when you go on the causeway, you're, right by Panova, formerly Hercules, which is a resin manufacturing plant that has been in Brunswick for like 100 years now. And you see these clouds of smoke coming out, and very, very, you know, often it smells. And so, yeah, it's kind of like gray and just like not fancy. And then when you go over to that bridge, that's when you're like, oh, the big houses and everything. And there's only white people here, you know, biking and walking and looking very happy and rich and white. So it's just like a story of two cities, because, you know, St. Simon's is a place with very wealthy people, and then Brunswick, Georgia is a city that is approaching a 40% poverty rate. And so, and it's, you know, a majority Black city. And so it's just like, yeah, you're driving into just a different world, literally a different world.
And so Brunswick is the place that's associated with one of the most tragic, egregious, heinous crime in the 21st century. How do you feel about that? Which is the murder of Ahmaud Arbery.
It's horrific to be known for that. No matter if I was in Georgia or elsewhere, I often told people I was from Brunswick. They'd be like, where's that? Even if they lived in Georgia, they didn't know. But now everyone's heard of it pretty much because of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. I heard about it like 2 months after it happened. It happened in February 2020, and I found out in April through a New York Times article. Even though I had actually been in Brunswick around the time it happened, I didn't know until that New York Times article, because that's, I guess, kind of how it works in small towns. Things happen, and sometimes you don't necessarily find out about it. But it kind of blew up after that New York Times article, and then the viral video of him being shot and killed came out, and just mortifying. And then it was kind of like the whole world saw what I had been seeing my whole life growing up, that Brunswick was just a very racist place. The man who actually shot and killed Ahmaud was actually a classmate of mine, Travis McMichael. I remember he was in my, he was 1 year above me. And I remember he was in my Spanish class, and when I was in the 9th grade. And I just remember, I mean, he was a redneck. I didn't know much about him, but I knew there was just these kids at our school who wore Confederate flags on their shirts and on their trucks. And you just knew that they were rednecks, and you knew they don't want to hang out with you because you're Black. And so when I found out it was him, I wasn't really surprised, because I knew that's what kind of kid he was. He was into the Confederacy and what it stands for. So that it wasn't shocking to me that this happened. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't surprising. Maybe it wasn't surprising nor shocking. I don't know, but it was a horrific thing. And it getting so much attention. I mean, I think it just depends on on Ahmaud Arbery's family and what they think justice looks like to them. I don't know what justice looks like to them, you know, and I don't, you know, right now, the perpetrators still haven't gone to trial yet. And so we'll see what happens with that. Recently, the DA, Jackie Johnson, who was involved in the case, and who, after, you know, Ahmaud Arbery was killed, she did not arrest Travis McMichael because she had worked with his father, and, you know, showed this clear bias towards the people who killed Ahmaud Arbery. I think she was recently indicted. So things are happening, but it's like you will never get Ahmaud back, you know? And so I'm just like, okay, you know, I know people raise money for his mother and his family. That's wonderful. Like they need money, and they, you know, and they need justice and compensation and reparations, but it's just like nothing is going to bring him back, and that's the tragedy, you know.
Bring up this point of racism in the coastal area. I mentioned this last week that, you know, at times it's the most peaceful, calm place. When you can look around and appreciate the flora, the fauna, you know, this big wide ocean that you can go to every day, but it's almost like it's a facade and it's hiding things. It's countering all that we live and see on the coast, like racism, environmental racism. Can you come?
Yes. So I mentioned when I was talking about, you know, in Brunswick, when you get on the causeway, you are near Pinova, formerly known as Hercules. And so that's one of the major active polluters in Brunswick. There's a few of them. And then also so Hercules, this company that I mentioned, did a lot of poisoning of wetlands and water in Brunswick by like just dumping toxic waste for years and years and years. Not just Hercules, there's other companies who have done this in Brunswick. And so that's how Brunswick ended up with 4 Superfund sites, meaning that they are 4 of the most toxic, hazardous sites in the United States, in little bitty Brunswick, Georgia. And then also, you know, we have many, in Brunswick, there's many, on the Georgia hazardous site inventory, there are many Glenn County sites on there as well. And so, yeah, it's this glaring environmental racism. And once again, growing up, I didn't really think about it. I knew that we had these big plants and things, and people's dads worked there, and that they were good jobs and steady jobs, and a good job for someone who didn't go to college or something like that. And you know, I knew that when I went to the south end of town, that I always lived towards the north end, but I knew when I went to the south end of town, it would smell because of Hercules or Georgia Pacific, or and you I got used to that smell. But yeah, it's not till I got older is when I really started thinking about it, or, you know, kind of like seeing articles here and there and being like, I want to dig into this. And then eventually in 2018 is when I first really started writing about environmental racism, environmental injustices in Brunswick. And I went to Altama Elementary School, which is on Altama Avenue, one of the main roads in Brunswick. And right behind it is a Superfund site. We never knew that. They never told us that while we went to school there. I went there. 3 of my siblings went there. My grandma worked in the cafeteria there. I did not know there was a Superfund site behind my elementary school. And that was just kind of horrifying to know. You know, I think that apparently, like, just, you know, having contact to those toxins through the soil usually like is not as bad as through the water. So the major way that people in Brunswick, coastal Georgia, come into contact with the toxins is through eating seafood. And so there's organizing happening through Glen Environmental Coalition and other organizations to kind of educate folks who are doing fishing and things like that, that there could possibly be toxins in your seafood because different companies, corporations have been dumped toxic waste in the waterways in Brunswick. And yeah, it's not good. And like I said earlier, fishing and seafood is a part of Black culture in coastal Georgia. So now you're poisoning our food. I actually went on a ride along with one of the Glen Environmental Coalition organizers, and he was out educating fishers. And there were, you know, people of all races, but there were Black fishers out there who had not heard about the possibility of environmental toxins being in seafood before. So I saw it firsthand, Black folks like doing this crabbing fishing who just don't know about the environmental toxins. You don't expect that, I guess, right? But they do have advisories in different places in Brunswick where it says, you know, do not fish here, or different things like that. But yeah, you know, I'm really glad that the environmental injustices in coastal Georgia are, it seems like more people, and not that people weren't organizing around it in the past, but it seems like that organizing is ramping up.
Have you written about the public health implication of pollution in Brunswick and environmental issues?
Yes. Yes, I actually recently wrote a story for Southerly, and it got republished other places as well, but writing an article about this chemical odor in Brunswick, in Glenn County, that happened. Well, it's pretty much still happening. It never really stopped, but it's kind of, there's, like I said, there's always been an odor, but it seems like it's just getting worse and worse. And so, you know, the EPD investigated it. Glen Environmental Coalition investigated it with researchers from the University of Georgia to kind of try to find out more about where is this chemical odor coming from, because it's not just an odor at this point. It's like making people physically sick. And of course, the EPD, you know, they said that they weren't able really to pin it to one, you know, manufacturer. And the University of Georgia and Glen Environmental Coalition said that the likely culprit is Georgia Pacific. And so I've written about that. You know, so it's these polluters are literally sickening people, writing about that, writing about the, you know, the environmental toxins in seafood, which we've already talked about. You know, Black folks eat a ton of that, and just everyone eats a ton of that. And the effects that can have. There are so many different chemicals. Some of them are PCBs, toxaphene. There's a lot of them. It's hard to keep up. But some of those can have impacts on children. I think people with uteruses and children are really the most vulnerable. It can affect child's development, their immune system, and then it can lead to thinning of the lining of the uterus and end up being endometriosis, and can lead to people having to have hysterectomies. The former executive director of Glen Environmental Coalition told me he has done, you know, kind of done different, like studying, kind of compiling research, things like that, and to show that the rate of hysterectomies in Glen County is far greater than other places. It's really, really disturbing, all of the things I've actually found out through my reporting.
I was saying that's alarming to know that it has such devastating health impact on women, children, and people in general. And you know, that's the role of our government, whether it's local, state, or federal, is to protect citizens. Do you think that you'll keep writing about these kinds of environmental?
Most definitely. That is something that I want to continue doing. Yes, most definitely.
in terms of the environmental issues that we discussed today, sometimes it seems so grim. Are you hopeful? And you are, what are you for?
Yeah, I am hopeful because it seems like there is more organizing and building capacity around being able to push back in Brunswick and Glenn County against environmental racism and systemic racism. And, you know, growing up in Brunswick, it was not the kind of place where you fought back if you were oppressed. And it seems like that is changing. And a lot of that was actually sparked by the murder of Ahmaud. I think it just shook everybody, and it woke up people, and it kind of, you know, it's like, oh, not only is that an issue, but we also have environmental racism, and we also have this, and, you know, so I do feel hopeful because I know that there are folks. I live in Atlanta actually right now. I guess I didn't say that during this, and so born and raised in Brunswick, but in Atlanta now. But, you know, I'm in contact with a lot of people down there who are organizing and movement building, and that always makes me hopeful. So,
Neesha, I hope you continue reading your work on environmental justice. And thank you so much for sharing this moment and sharing your work on behalf of the most vulnerable population in the state.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I always want to talk about this stuff. So yeah, I've just, anyone who wants to talk to me, who has any like ideas, who has any tips on different stories in coastal Georgia. Like I said, you announced earlier, my website is neeshawrites.com, and you can get in contact with me there. So anything really, yeah, anything pertaining to coastal Georgia that is an injustice that needs, you know, to some light on it, please contact me.
And by the way, to pick up a copy of Macintosh County Magazine, really great.
Okay, yes, I will.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.